Good morning. Hello, gender studies. How are you? So I got a couple questions about this racial contract and social contract. And because with ethnocentrism, it becomes sort of the underpinning of our entire semester, I just wanted to take a few minutes and go over it. So um here we go. All right, let me get my board going here. So years ago, this guy named Jean-Jacques Rousseau came up with the idea of the social contract. Well, he didn't come up with it. It's been around, Greco-Roman, it's been around forever. So he says, Rousseau in the social contract says, in order to build a society, in order to build like a civilized society, I'll get into that whole like civilized shit later. Sorry, stuff. In order to have a civilized society, we need to take some of the things that make us human and subdue them. And that's our social contract. The social contract says, I recognize I'm part of a larger collective and I need to play by the rules, basically, right? And whatever those rules are of my given society, I am going to suppress whatever I need to in myself in order to have this like equitable and just society. Obviously, we'll get to the fact that it's not equitable, right? Okay, so the social contract is this idea that we have a contract in order to live in a social construct, right? In order to live together as a society. Rousseau said this. Rousseau. So there's multiple problems with this, right? There's multiple problems with this. But for our purposes here, there's two ways I want to look at this. One, and then we'll get to the racial contract. One is that what this does is naturalizes hierarchy, okay? And by hierarchy, I mean this in multiple ways, and we'll get to this, like the racial part of that there's racial hierarchies, whites on top, right? There's gender hierarchies, men on top. There's sexual orientation hierarchies, hetero on top, right? No pun intended with on top, obviously. Okay, so it naturalizes hierarchy in the sense that it says, in society, there's just going to be the top dogs. In society, there's going to be those who are on top and those who are on the bottom. Is there, right? Like, Lord of the Flies. Do you guys remember reading Lord of the Flies in high school? And it's like, you put a group of people in a room together and this pecking order emerges, right? Piggy's at the bottom, they kill him, right? Because he has glasses or something. Somebody takes charge. And so there's this idea that there's this like natural hierarchy. And maybe we do see this, right? Maybe we see this in our families and our workplaces, in our group of friends, even that maybe there's somebody who like often just makes the decisions and there's other people who sort of follow along. Maybe there is a natural hierarchy. The problem with that, when you get to a societal level, right? That might be okay. There might be more dominant and less dominant, more submissive, right? Dom sub relationships that are natural, fine. But what happens when you get to a societal level? What happens? I'm a pretty dominant personality, right? I think most teachers are, right? We like being in control. We like dominating things. Um, so, um, so what happens when we're in a society and we need to all get along and like I don't get to be the boss because I want to, right? I would like to be the queen of the universe, but I didn't get that job. I think Beyonce did. But what happens, right? So I have to take my feelings of like my human just impulses of rage and lust and greed, right? Like I want that Porsche, car, do I get to go get it? Do I get to go take it? No. I mean, I can, but I'll go to jail. Somebody pisses me off, do I get to go murder them? No. Well, again, right? There's problems, but no, I don't get to do that. So the social contract says, while there may be hierarchies in small places, in a society, we've agreed to this contract where you don't get to murder, you don't get to lust, you don't get to greed, you don't get to steal. But what happens to all that? So here's the second point. What happens to all of those feelings that you're having of lust and greed and rage, right? Please, I mommy rage out all the time in my mind and sometimes in reality, right? These are natural human feelings, to covet, to lust, to like want, right? It's our human condition. And it's good. It motivates us. It propels us, right? It keeps us going. So the thing is that we have to suppress those feelings. We have to suppress these like human feelings. But when we do that, and you may be like, okay, I'll do that. I won't go around murdering people. I won't go around lusting after people and expecting like to have sex with anybody I find attractive, right? That's just not life. It's not a society, rather, I should say. However, Carl Jung, Jung, if you can't, it doesn't come up very well, Jung, Carl Jung, who used to be best friends with Freud, and then they had a falling out, but contemporary of Freud, right? He said that what happens is that you push all this stuff down, these feelings down, and they have to come out somewhere, right? Where do they come out? Not rhetorical. Where do they come out? Where do these feelings come out? We cheat, we have road rage, right? We kill people, we smash cars, we freak out in arguments and throw things, we throw a plate against a wall, right? Or worse, obviously, okay? So Carl Jung said that is called the shadow self. And the shadow self ends up becoming this natural consequence of suppressing our emotions. Not the same thing as being oppressed. We suppress, right? We push down. But so here's the thing. Here's the thing. We take this idea of the social contract from Rousseau and John Locke, right? And all these, famous philosophers who said, this is how we have a just society and a civilized society and blah, 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 right? Take all of that and we say, it assumes that we all have the same human condition, right? It assumes that we all have the same predicaments, right? But do we? Do we all over the world have the same predicaments, circumstances, abilities, opportunities? Not quite, right? So it not only naturalizes hierarchy, it normalizes, how do I want to say this? It normalizes like the center, right? It normalizes the center. So it normalizes whiteness, straightness, binary, right? Male, female binariness. It normalizes whatever is the center of that particular culture. And globally, it's, patriarchy, men domination, that kind of thing. So what comes out of this is that Charles Mills, who's a super cool guy, he's a Jamaican Black critical theorist, African-American critical theorist, who was like, you know what? This is some bullshit. Like, you're assuming so much, Rousseau and all of these guys from, even way back Greco-Roman times are assuming so much about like privilege and access and, who gets to feel these things, right? You're talking about feeling human emotions. Who even gets access to their emotional well-being? Do people in developing countries, do like the untouchables in India get full access to their emotional range? Right? Like, no. So he came up with this idea of the racial contract. And it's not that he came up with, he's not like asserting a racial contract, right? He's saying there is a racial contract, like it is. Oops, I didn't mean to, whoops, you can't even see that anyway. I didn't mean to put a line through it, I meant to underline. Oh my God. So the racial contract says, this is all well and good. And in addition, there is a racial supposition, like an assumption. And it says that whites are on top and blacks are on the bottom. It says that in immigration studies, Asians are at the top and they're positioned as the model minority. And therefore that, denigrates other immigrants and says, oh, if the Chinese can do it, why can't you, right? If Asians are doing it, why can't you? Why can't you play the concert violin it too? See, you're inept in some way, you're lacking in some way, right? So that we pit people against each other, right? So then the developed countries like the United States and England and wherever, the developed countries say, what do you mean, Philippines, what's the issue, right? Just work it out. What do you mean Pakistan, you can't get it together? Work it out, right? We did it, why can't you? So the racial contract says that's normalizing whiteness. That's normalizing Eurocentric values. That's normalizing and centering this Western mind. Who says capitalism is better? Who says that, Anglos have better features? Who said that? Who ever set that as the bar? Who? Well, of course, Anglos, right? Like, right? Who says men should be dominant? Men, right? Who says that? So the racial contract interrogates this naturalization of like what a civilization is supposed to be, what the hierarchy is supposed to be, who gets to be center, who's then positioned as the other, capital O other, in the margin, right? So this is what the article's talking about. And it's talking about, and it's bringing a contemporary correlation to it, right? Connection. And it's saying, look at Trayvon Martin. Look at this situation where you have this teen, this kid, he's a child, right? He's a teen and he's going buying Skittles. He's got a hoodie up. But because of his Black skin, he has been racialized to be at the bottom of the hierarchy, so that George Zimmerman, this like random, guy who is positioned as the center, says, I get to police this area because I live here. It's my territory. And I get to shoot and kill this teenager. And then not only do I think that I get to do that because of my whiteness, because of my masculinity, because of my Westernization, because of all the ways that I'm center, right? George Zimmerman is center, but also because society tells me that I get to. Society naturalizes the fact that then I get to assert my rights as the top of the hierarchy. So what ends up happening? That motherfucker, sorry, goes free. He goes free. He goes free, right? Because society in the racial contract way back, right? Fugitive slave laws of the 1850s, the Jim Crow laws of the 1860s and Reconstruction says, and of course, obviously way before that, right? The settlers coming here and taking native land. It's a historical perpetuation of domination and oppression by those at the center. And the racial contract says society has reinforced this all along, right? It's an implied, and there's so much white privilege. No one said like, oh, there's a lot of whiteness being upheld here, because there's so much white privilege. Whites like don't even see it, right? There's so much white privilege. They're blinded to it. So nobody in the social contract brought up race because they're all white. So they're raceless, right? They're straight. So they never brought up sexual orientation. It's their privilege. Their privilege blinded them to the fact that there's an implied racial contract. And I would go further and say like sexual orientation contract, right? Gender contract, right? Right. So that if you're not straight, you're other. If you're not in the binary, cis, male, female, you're other, right? You have to identify as secondary, second class citizenship, right? You don't get marriage rights. You don't get to be in the military until, right, yesterday. Right? Okay. So that's social contract and racial contract. If the reading is a little bit difficult, just, you can Google stuff, you can watch videos, try your best, skim it and see what you've got there. And I'll see you in office hours. I think it's time now. It's 8 to 10. So if you have any questions or issues, just come to office hours. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Our last term, because we're going to be doing this next week. Can you, if you're writing this down, which I hope you are, it's next. I'm just running out of room. Oh, sorry for the hiccups. I don't usually talk this much anymore. Ethnocentrism. Can you see that? Ethnocentrism, right? It's phonetic, meaning it's spelled how it sounds. So ethnocentrism. You'll see it a lot in the modules. So ethnocentrism connects to all of this globally. So this is what we're going to talk about, because this is global gender. This isn't just my normal gender 101. This is global gender. So ethnocentrism says my culture is superior to your culture. And so we'll talk about how ethnocentrism plays out throughout the world. Like we judge other cultures by our culture, right? By the standards of our culture. So, for example, I tell this story in my gender classes when we're in person. I was in grad school and, I was in my late 20s. I was in grad school. This was 20 years ago. And we went to a bar, because what else do you do when you're in your 20s? And there's no quarantine. You go to a bar, and we went to this Russian bar. And I have some Russian heritage. My great grandfathers on my mother's side are Russian Jews, and so I'm like, yeah, Russian bar. These are my people, right? So we go to this bar and we're drinking, and there's all these there's like 100 kinds of vodkas, and it's whatever. We're having a blast. And I see on the counter, the like bar, there's this big glass jar, huge, like a huge glass jar, and it's filled with eggs, like peeled eggs in this liquid. So me, because I'm this, but 20, so I'm like Tabitha Morgan personality, but like to the extreme, because I'm in my 20s, and now I'm like 6 shots in. Don't. So I am like, wow, what the hell is that? Rah, right? Eggs in a thing. So I'm like, that's nasty, right? Because here I am from Philadelphia, and now I'm at this place in Maine, right? And I'm like loud, and I curse too much, and I'm super Philly and, city-ish, and everyone's like scared of me. Whatever, their loss. So Philly's a lot when you're not from Philly, right? Like, if you travel someplace else and you're like Philly, it's a lot for other people. Wusses. So I start going off. That's nasty. I don't get that. That's gross. What are those eggs doing in there? That's disgusting. So, but I'm like laughing, right? I'm not being, psycho mean about it. So finally, this person pulls me aside and says, listen, little girl, right? In this like thick Russian accent. Listen, this is our cultural practice. We eat pickled eggs. We do a shot of vodka, and then we take a bite of a pickled egg. Have you ever had pickled stuff? It's like super sour, and it cuts the taste of anything else. Vodka's like rubbing alcohol, right? So, and it like backhanded me. It was like, I was like, oh my God, I hear you. I get it. I get what I'm doing and saying right now. I'm literally judging your cultural practice by my cultural standards. And it's not your problem. It's my problem, right? It's my problem. Why do I think that not eating pickled eggs is the right thing to do? Who do I think I am? Right? Who do I think I am to judge that cultural practice? Right? That's my whiteness. That's my, class privilege. That it's a hundreds of years of privilege, right? So what happens when you're on another level of that hierarchy? What happens when you're African American female and you're having human feelings, right? Right? It's called, oh my God, I just blanked on the workplace, not white fragility, not identity politics. Oh my God, I talk about this all the time. Oh my God, it's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, it's when you're, as a professional, you're held to a different standard, right? Because you're of color, because you're an immigrant, because you're queer, because of any reason, right? Your disability, you're held to a different standard. Okay. Respectability politics. Thanks. That was driving me nuts. Respectability politics says, as a Black woman, I them am being held to different standards. White women get to cry at work, they get to yell at customer service representatives, and they get held to no punishment. There's no consequences. That's white privilege. It's gender privilege, right? That women get to get away with a lot more stuff than men do. I can throw a fit. I can publicly throw a fit and no one's going to do anything. Where Black folks get the police called on them for barbecuing, right? Circling back to Trayvon Martin, right? This boy, this young man is trying to buy Skittles and is listening to music and like walking around with his hood up, where white kids would get to do that day in and day out, right? So not only obviously is there a social contract, there's a racial contract, and what happens when you're not on the top of that? What does life look like? What are the layers of navigation that starts happening because you're not at the top of these hierarchies? And then on top of that, let's go global and we talk about ethnocentrism, our ethnicity, in this case, nationalism, our like Western mind. So even if you're a Black female and you're at the bottom of a hierarchy in American society, you're still at the top of a hierarchy for Americanness, right? So even as an oppressed population here, you could still be ethnocentric, right? Does that make sense? So there's different hierarchies and we can be in different places, right? Like I can be a Muslim woman who's queer, but is impoverished, right? So I have, or is wealthy rather. So I can be oppressed because I'm of a religious minority. I can be oppressed because of my sexual orientation. However, because of my wealth, I get access and agency to like resources and travel and books and things that support me. Social media, right? That supports me, right? Okay. Does that make sense? Does that help? Okay, so more about ethnocentrism in week 3. Okay, all right. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you for your attention and for your willingness to engage all this. It's a lot, but you're doing great and I appreciate you. All right, see you in office hours.